Hi everyone, welcome back to our chapter by chapter review of the American Yawp. Now today we're taking on chapter 8. This is the market revolution. And in this chapter we're going to explore the massive economic transformation that occurred in the United States during the early 19th century. Now this era saw technological advances, new transportation system, and we saw the rise of an industrial economy that would forever change American life. So let's dive into this. Now keep in mind that we are discussing between about 1790 and I would say probably about 1840. So about a 50-year window in time. During this period, we also have presidencies of Jefferson, which we've discussed, and the War of 1812, which we've discussed, and even a few presidents that we haven't quite gotten to yet. Now, by the early 1800s, the United States was undergoing a period of rapid change with technological innovations driving economic growth. This is an American industrial revolution. Now, one of the most significant developments was the rise of factories and industrialization. This was marked by the introduction of new machines like Samuel Slater's textile mills, which was one of the first factories in America creating cotton yarn, and Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which makes the production of cotton much more economical because it means once it's picked, it can now be processed. The seeds can be removed much quicker. Now, Whitney's cotton gin was invented in 1793. Whitney was a teacher, a tutor, who had been hired by the family of Nathaniel Greene, Revolutionary War hero, down on a plantation in Savannah, Georgia, the Mulberry Plantation, if I remember correctly. And he got into conversations with him about the cultivation of cotton and how difficult it was to produce the cotton, process the cotton for sale. Removing the seeds was very difficult. So he puts his mind to it and invents a very simple machine that could remove the seeds. It would make it easier and faster to separate the cotton fiber from the seeds, which are they have little hooks and they're very difficult to remove by hand. Now this invention dramatically increases cotton production in the South. It fuels the expansion of plantation economy, and unfortunately, need labor to do this kind of agriculture. We are going to see the expansion of slavery. Now at the same time, northern factories are growing rapidly, especially in the textile industry, and the rise of the factory system is going to create opportunities for wage labor, particularly for women and children, but also it's going to raise concerns about working conditions and the exploitation of labor. These early factories, especially in New England, many of which are going to hire young women that haven't gotten married yet. Once they're married, then they're not working outside of the home in this way, because these are single women, childless women that were working in these factories at this stage in American history. Now, along with the growth of industry, we have transportation, a transportation revolution that played a crucial role in the transforming of the American economy, because if factories are producing things, you got to get those things to market. New transportation methods connected the country in ways that was unimaginable just a few decades before. Now, one of the most notable achievements of this era was the construction of the Erie Canal in 1825. The Erie Canal stretches 360 miles. It has an elevation increase that's pretty drastic. The canal connected the Great Lakes to the Hudson River. And this is going to reduce the time it takes for transporting goods. Before, if you want to get goods from, let's say, the Great Lakes to New York City, it was an overland process, 350 miles worth of horrible roads, and it was very costly, very expensive, and very slow. But the Erie Canal makes New York City a major hub of trade, because now goods could be sent from, say, Chicago. It could be sent to the mouth of the Erie, I think it's Buffalo, loaded on board, sent down the canal, down the Hudson, and now put on boats to ship the world all over from New York Harbor. So this makes New York the economic city of the United States, the economic heart of the United States. Now, the development of the steamboat and railroad also will revolutionize travel and commerce as well. Steamboats could travel upstream on rivers like the Mississippi, opening new markets to the interior of the country. Remember, before this, you pretty much could travel one direction down the Mississippi, and that was simply to ride the current. Steamboats now mean we can use engines, usually coal-powered, and push against the current. It was slow, but a whole lot faster than moving wagons on foot. So these transportation advancements helped to create a national market economy. It allowed farmers and manufacturers to sell their goods over long distances, and this is a game changer. We're going to start to see a more interconnected national system. Now, it wasn't just transportation that was revolutionizing the country. Communication was changing too. In 1844, Samuel Morse is going to create the telegraph, basically electronic bits and dots, a code. Morse code would be transported down these copper wires and be reassembled by someone skilled in interpreting what those bits and dots means at the other end. This is a game changer for business, news, and politics as well. Now, before the telegraph, it could take days or even weeks for news to travel from one city to another, usually by letter or by newspaper. Now information could be sent in a matter of minutes, and businesses could be done much more rapidly. Quicker decisions could be made. Politicians could respond to crises much faster, and newspapers could reach a much wider audience. Now, this communication revolution, combined with the rise of cheap, mass-produced newspapers, that's going to help knit the country together, create a more informed and engaged public. In many ways, this is going to start to make folks more, I guess we could say, more cognizant of the events that's going to lead us down to, well, future troubles like the American Civil War. So what's happening with society? With the rise of factories, new technologies, the nature of work and labor in America is changing drastically during the market revolution. Now, for much of American history, most people worked on family farms, they were skilled artisans in small workshops, but now more and more people were becoming wage laborers in factories. The work doesn't come to you, you go to the work. Now, the growth of factories, particularly in the North, created a demand for labor. Young women, especially in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, which I mentioned before indirectly, worked in textile mills under strict supervision. And it was a boarding school kind of a situation. You live there, you work there, you sleep there, you eat there. And again, this was if you were a single young lady. Meanwhile, men worked in industries such as iron foundries, railroads. Jobs were dangerous, unstable, dock workers as well. As cities grew, so did the challenges of urbanization. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, exploitation of workers are all going to be very common. The period also saw the beginning of industrialized labor movements or organized labor movements, and we start to see the first labor unions, although really we don't see any major influential ones until well after the American Civil War, with the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, which we'll talk about in our History 1302 discussions if you continue on with these chapter reviews. What were the labor unions or labor movements wanting? Better wages, shorter working hours, safer conditions. That's sort of the great trinity of the labor unions. Now, what about American society and culture? The market revolution didn't just change the economy. It transformed American society, and the rise of a market-based economy had led to growing inequalities between the rich and poor. The rich are getting richer. The poor are trying to scrape by. We do see a growth in the middle class a little bit, but there is a growing disparity of wealth. New wealth was concentrated in the hands of the factory owners and the merchants, and not the people running the machines or doing the physical labor. Now, many people saw this widening gap between rich and the working class as a sign of social instability. New ideas about class, work, the role of women in society began to emerge. And, for example, this idea of the cult of domesticity began to come along, promoting the idea that a woman's place was in the home, that men should be working in factories and working outside the home and bringing home the paycheck to become the breadwinner. Women were nurturing the families, raising up the kids, taking care of the house. Men were expected to work in the public sphere. And one of the major voices of this cult of domesticity is a woman by the name of Catherine Beecher. Catherine Beecher is the sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who would go on to write Uncle Tom's Cabin. We'll get into that as we move into the whole Civil War and some of the slavery issues pre-Civil War in future chapters. Now, at the same time, this period saw a rise in social reform movements. It's sparked by the Second Great Awakening, another religious movement very similar to the first, where we see larger denominations begin to grow. The Baptists and the Methodists are both going to see a great expansion in numbers during the Second Great Awakening. It's a religious revival. Now, inspired by their religious beliefs, many reformers worked to address problems of the era. Temperance, which alcoholism, temperance means we're trying to curb that problem within our society, convince people not to turn to alcohol, which a lot of people did in this period of time, especially coping with some of these changes in the workplace. Prison reforms. Let's make better prisons where people can start to learn how to not be criminals, I guess. The idea of penitentiaries. The word penitent means to be thoughtful. So to think about what you did so you don't go and do it again. And also women's rights as well. So much of the conversation we've had so far has been northern related. Northern factories, northern businesses, northern transportation. So while the North is industrializing, the South is remaining largely agrarian. And by this point in history, the cotton boom is taking off. It's fueled by the market revolution, and it leads to an expansion of slavery. Cotton was in high demand, especially in northern textile mills like in New England. European markets demanded cotton out of the American South. This makes it the most valuable export in the United States by the mid-19th century. By the time the Civil War rolls around, 60% of all goods being shipped out of the United States was Southern cotton. So to meet the demand, Southern planters are expanding westward into areas like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and creating what became known as the Cotton Kingdom. This expansion directly led to an increase in the number of people needed to work in these fields, which means enslaved peoples. And this system is going to be the backbone of Southern cotton production. The internal slave trade grew as millions of enslaved people were forced out of the upper South into the deeper South, or forced out of northern states that was in the process of gradual emancipation, gradually ending slavery in their states. Well, if you're told you're going to have to, you're free your slaves next week and you get nothing for it, well, what do a lot of folks do? They turn around and sell those slaves down the river, as the phrase was. And so we start to see a concentration of slavery in the deep South. Now, this period saw the entrenchment of a deeply divided society in the South. On one side, you had wealthy white planters controlling vast tracts of land and hundreds of enslaved laborers. And on the other side, you saw enslaved African Americans with the conditions common to slavery, no rights or freedom. At the same time, you also had a large number of very impoverished Southerners as well that owned no slaves at all. The numbers of slave owners was roughly 25% in the entire American South. 75% owned no slaves at all. But this institution is going to be the backbone of the Southern economy. The spread of slavery not only had a devastating human toll, but it also reinforced the political and economic power of the Southern elite, of those folks that did own the land and did keep the slaves. Now, while slavery expanded in the South, the opposition to the institution began to grow in the North. Abolitionist movements are becoming more common, hence leading to some of those gradual emancipation systems in some of the northern states. Some are making moral arguments. Some are making religious convictions. Some are simply making economic arguments. It's hard to compete financially if you're trying to get a paying job at an area where slavery is used with regularity. And so all these are going to be arguments we will talk about moving forward into future chapters. But we begin to see an argument of slavery as incompatible with the nation's founding ideals and liberty and equality. So we do start to see that as we move into the 10 or 20 or so years prior to the coming of the American Revolution. All right, so guys, that's a wrap. I kept it under 15 minutes. We're done with Chapter 8. This is the Market Revolution, and this transforms the United States in profound ways. From the rise of industry, transportation, the expansion of slavery, social reform movements, many of which we didn't really get all that deep into, but dig deeper as you read through the text. The changes are going to set the stage for many conflicts, for a number of things in future chapters, so it's important that you understand this issue of the market revolution. If you have a chance, I'll try to put down in the link below. Crash Course History has an awesome video on the market revolution, and it's one that I typically show in class when time allows. So if this has been helpful to you, you can always hit like, and you'll get notified if I add anything else to these playlists. Otherwise, you guys take care and reach out if you need anything at all.